Okay, so this is gonna be a heavy conversation, but I think it's a really important one to have. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. Today I want to talk about the Gabby Petito documentary on Netflix called American Murder. This is a heavier topic than I think some of the topics I usually cover, and I really do not normally watch true crime documentaries and true crime content. To be honest with you, my anxiety really can't handle that kind of stuff. We are going to get into some pretty heavy themes here as far as abuse and things like that. This information is really important to get out there, but I do understand if some of this is triggering for you. I highly recommend you watch the documentary. As someone who normally does not watch true crime because it's just really aggravates my anxiety, I will say this documentary was really well done. So if you are interested, I highly recommend you watch it. But there were some topics in this documentary that I just thought were like really important and I really wanted to touch on. Before I get into this, I want to acknowledge that like these are real people. Okay, the people I'm talking about in this documentary, these are all real life people, and this was a horrible tragedy that should have never happened. And I want to be incredibly respectful of everybody involved in this situation because, you know, I think sometimes we can watch documentaries like this and hear these stories and we can actually forget the humanity. I want to touch on these topics not to dig up people's trauma or to exploit people's trauma or anything like that. I just believe that there are some topics in this documentary that stood out to me, some that I'm hearing people talk about, but some that I feel like aren't being talked about enough. So as much as this tragedy is heartbreaking, I really hope that a result of this tragedy can be awareness around some of the warning signs of abuse, some of the warning signs of domestic violence, so that women don't end up in the same situation. I really just hope that we can learn from this. If you aren't familiar with the details of the Gabby Petito case, I'm not going to dive into that here because this isn't a true crime channel. I highly recommend you watch the documentary. I would actually watch the documentary as opposed to doing like online research about the case because I will be honest, I didn't follow the case when it was going on in the media, but what little information I did get turned out to be pretty misleading. And so I do think that the media didn't do a great job of covering this case when it was going on, at least the limited parts that I saw. So I would recommend watching the documentary. So if you really want to know the details of this case, please watch the documentary. So one of the first things I took away from this documentary was actually that I'm about the same age as Gabby's mom, which was a little unsettling for me. And one of the things I've been seeing as a common theme that's been coming up when people have been talking about this documentary is I keep seeing people say Gabby just didn't live long enough to get to know what the red flags were. Oh, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to even think about that. But that said, that's why it's so important for young girls to learn red flags and learn how to spot red flags at such a young age. And honestly, I would say before they even start dating. And I realize that many young girls are not going to listen to the red flags. They're not going to listen to the advice. And some young girls are going to have to learn life lessons the hard way, and hopefully they get to survive. It's one of the reasons why I think now that I've been speaking up more about red flags in relationships and things like that, I've really come to realize, being now an older woman in the world, being somebody in her 40s who had to learn a lot of life lessons the hard way, and I'm incredibly grateful I was able to survive all of those life lessons. I've come to the realization our society really loves to discredit older women. You know, we get called, you know, like lonely old cat ladies, and you know, act like we're just jealous of younger women and things like that. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, although I do think society perpetuates that, oftentimes because society mistreats older women so much. Instead of revering the wisdom that older women have accumulated, because, you know, if you are a woman who is an older woman, then that means that you've survived all of the life lessons that you've had to learn. Instead of revering that, especially when it comes to passing on that wisdom to young women, we discredit older women. I really do believe it's because the men in our society essentially want to be the ones to control the younger women. They want to control the narrative. They don't want the message of older women to get to the young girls, because then the young girls have the wisdom of the older women in society. They have the wisdom of the wise woman. I know this is slightly off topic, but I really want to preface this because I do know that there's so many men that will jump to, oh, you're just jealous of younger women. Oh, you're just a lonely old cat lady. Well, you're single. What advice do you have to give to younger women? It's like, well, I've also survived being single. I've survived bad relationships, and I've learned a lot from the experience. I can share that wisdom with younger women. I don't look at younger women and think, I wish I was you. I mean, as you get older, there's definitely aspects to youth that you miss, of course, but I don't look at younger women and think, gee, I wish I was you. Like, I wish I was that young and naive again. I don't. Would I like to relive being a younger woman with the wisdom I have now? Absolutely. But I don't look at younger women and think that I'm jealous of them. I look at them and think, like, I wish I could share with them the wisdom that I have now so that they don't have to go through the things that I went through. And I also know there's a lot of younger women that aren't gonna listen because I was one of them. There's a lot of lessons that people tried to teach me when I was younger and I didn't listen. And I think part of it is because society does love to discredit older women and the wisdom that we have to pass on. And that's one of the main reasons why I even make these videos, is because, you know, I learned a lot of life lessons. I survived them, thank God. I'm grateful for that. And I really just want to pass on some of those life lessons to younger women so maybe they don't have to suffer in the same ways that I did. I think that the Gabby Petito case is really evident of why it is so important for young women to be taught what the warning signs are, to be taught how to protect themselves. And I know there's going to be people that are going to be like, well, why aren't we teaching young boys how to not be abusers and things like that, which is a valid conversation to have. Unfortunately, women can't do that. I wish it was different, but it isn't. Like, when it comes to the boys and the men and how they behave, that's not something that us as women really have control over. I know that's hard to hear and it's hard to think about, but it's really not something we can control. What we do have control over is us. We have control over what we can do to protect ourselves. Unfortunately, that's just the state of the world right now. And I wish things were different. I really do. I think men working on themselves and, you know, not being abusers and not being unsafe for women, I think that's all a valid conversation for sure. But I also think that we need to have a conversation of teaching girls, particularly young women, and honestly, you're never too old to learn these lessons. So if you are an older woman and you need to hear these lessons, then believe me, it's never too late to learn these lessons. But I think it's just so important that young women, before they even start dating, know how to pick up on red flags and warning signs in relationships. And that's one of the main reasons why I make this content. And I think watching this documentary and seeing this young girl who unfortunately, again, did not have a chance to learn these lessons the hard way and move forward with her life, unfortunately, and knowing that I'm, you know, about the same age as her mother, I think was really, it really stood out to me and kind of reaffirmed why I make this content and why talking about this stuff is so important. So I just kind of wanted to preface the conversation with that. There's so many aspects to this documentary and I see a lot of people covering these topics, so I want to kind of talk about a few things that I don't see people talk about quite as much. I have to admit, as someone who has never been in a physically abusive relationship, I went into watching this documentary not really thinking that I would relate to their relationship between Gabby and her boyfriend Brian. And I was actually very overwhelmed at some aspects to their relationship that really hit me hard because it was very relatable. Not the physical violence part, which is, you know, I think that that should go without saying, and it's sad that you even have to say this, but if a man hits you once, he'll hit you again. If a man shows that he will intentionally harm you, he'll do it again. And it'll just get worse. You know, as much as I know, and I've said this in other videos, and I just want to state this, if you are a woman and you are with a man who has been physically violent with you, I understand that sometimes it can be scary to leave. I can understand sometimes you may not know how to leave safely. And I always encourage you to do what you have to do to safely leave. But please know you're worthy of getting out. Please know you're worthy of getting help and getting out safely. And whatever it is that you need to do, if you need to reach out to somebody or you need to reach out to an organization or something that can help you get out safely, please know you're worthy of that. That is a big red flag, and I think that there's a lot of signs in this documentary that Brian, Gabby's boyfriend, had some narcissistic qualities, that he was very manipulative. I think there were a lot of text message conversations and journal entries and stuff of Gabby saying she didn't deserve him. I think anytime you get into a situation where a woman is starting to feel like she doesn't deserve a man, in a sense like she thinks he's too good for her, which was clearly not the case in this dynamic, and I'm gonna get into this, but anytime you get that situation, it's a pretty clear indication that a woman is being manipulated. Like, it's a pretty clear indication, because ladies, there's no man on the world that is too good for you. There just isn't. Like, there's no man on the planet that like is too good for you. Like, this is why I always say, women, we're the prize. We are always the prize. In every dynamic, as women, we're the prize. And I really, really believe that women need to own that. Women need to own within themselves that, like, we are the prize. Like, we are what men work for. And if a man isn't trying to win you, he's not your man. Don't ever feel like you have to try to deserve a man, or you have to try to be worthy of a man. That's not your job as a woman. And if you're ever put in that situation where you feel that way, he's not your man. He's not worth it. No man is worth you chasing after him. No man is. He should be pursuing you. He should be trying to put in the effort, and he should be showing you that he's the kind of man that you should choose. Like, that's just, that's, I know there's people that are going to argue with this, but like, honestly, that's just biologically the only way that the system works. It's the only way you can get a decent relationship. Like, it can't work any other way. It doesn't work any other way. And I have other videos where I go into this about not chasing men and things like that. I'm not going to dive into that. Again, these are some very common warning signs that a lot of people talk about, so I'm just going to touch on these briefly. There was a body cam footage of Gabby and Brian getting pulled over by police. That's a very controversial part of the story, which actually really surprised me because I hadn't seen the body cam video. I'd heard about it in the media, but I hadn't seen it till I watched the documentary. And the narrative around it was really twisted. And I know there's a lot of people that think that like that was the make or break point. I don't really think it was, to be honest, because for a lot of reasons, but I think that no matter what the cops did in that situation, I think that they were inevitably going to find their way back together, and that this probably would have gone the same way. But one of the aspects to this particular interaction, their first interaction with law enforcement, was because Brian was driving their van very erratically. And that does get into a red flag that people are starting to talk about. It's not something that I ever really thought of in the past, but the more I started hearing people talk about it, the more I'm like, wow, that really does line up. Is men who drive very erratically and very irresponsibly, that's often a warning sign of potential abuse. It may not necessarily come to physical abuse, but erratic driving is a form of abuse. When you're actually driving very dangerously from an emotional place and stuff, and you're not being a careful, cautious driver, that's a big warning sign in a guy. Big warning sign if a man is a very irresponsible driver. There's really no way of knowing, just based on this documentary, if that wasn't like an isolated incident because, you know, they were fighting and he was driving erratically, or if that was a pattern. Like, we don't actually have any evidence of that, but I would say likely, I'm gonna take a guess that it probably was a pattern. And ladies, if you are in a relationship with a man who is a very erratic driver, he gets in the car, he's very emotional and stuff, and I get it. Like, I live in a state that's known for our road rage, and so I get it, but like, if you are with a man who drives very irresponsibly, it's a very likely sign that if he isn't already being abusive, he probably will be at some point. For a lot of reasons, it shows irresponsibility. It shows a complete lack of empathy for people he's in the car with, as well as like other people in the world. Like, it shows that he has no concern for, again, your safety, the people in the car's safety, or, you know, anybody else on the road's safety. And so it shows a complete lack of actually caring about the consequences of his actions, or caring about, you know, the damage he might do to, you know, other people in the world. So that's a big warning sign. It's probably something that I'm gonna take a guess that maybe Gabby didn't maybe even really see until she was already on the road with this guy. So, you know, I realized she was in a situation where, you know, she's on the road in a strange place with this guy. She pretty much just has him. I can understand why she would feel like she needed to overlook red flags, because she might have already gotten in too deep and may have been scared to leave. I do know, I did hear somebody else say this one time, because Gabby did contact an ex-boyfriend and talk about how she was gonna come up with a plan to leave Brian. If you feel like you have to come up with a plan to leave a man, it's probably a sign that you need to leave that man. And I understand that you may need to make a plan. I get that. If you do need to make a plan, please do it safely, but that's usually a warning sign. And that's actually one of the reasons why, honestly, you have to take relationships slow. I know people really love to put up on a pedestal this idea of like, you know, when you know, and like rushing into things and stuff, and people can pretend to be anything for a short period of time, and you really have to take the time to get to know people. It does seem like, you know, I get that Gabby and Brian were young, but it does seem like they jumped into their relationship very quickly. And I get it, you're young, you're in love, you know, kind of get a little bit obsessed with each other and stuff, and that's not really uncommon, but you really have to be so careful. And the fact that Gabby was already like moving in with Brian and his family, I get it that they were moving to Florida, so they were living in a different place, but, and I say this as somebody who did have an ex-husband who moved in with myself and my parents and stuff, so like I've been there. So I speak from experience when I say this. If you're not in a position where you and a significant other can like get your own place and like afford to live together, don't move in with parents. I mean, I understand like if something happens for some reason and like you lose your place and you need to stay with, you know, one of your parents temporarily or something like that. Like I understand there's some circumstances, but generally speaking, if you just like move in with a significant other into their parents' house and there's no like plan, I think it's a recipe for disaster. And it's probably a sign that the two of them were probably moving too fast and making the decision to do this like van life thing very quickly in their relationship and stuff. I mean, I get it, when you're young, you kind of get caught up in the romance of everything, but it's one of the reasons why it's just so not a good idea to, especially as a woman, to put yourself in a situation with a man where you need a plan to get out until you have actually like really gotten to know someone, really paid attention to their actions, paid attention to who they are as a person, and really taken the time to get to know them well enough so that they've had a chance to show their true colors, which takes time. And that's why for women and for women's safety, it's important to really go slow and pace a relationship, to not jump into something until you've given a man a chance to show you who he really is. Because that's usually when you get into a situation where you need a plan to get out because you've gotten too far in, and then you realize who the man is, and then you have to backtrack. And again, this isn't deflecting blame from somebody who is an abuser or anything like that, or putting the blame on the victim. It's just, I just want women to be smart about this. I want women to not jump into situations where they could potentially be harmed and not be able to get themselves out of it. Because like there's always going to be bad people in the world. There is. I mean, we can do everything we can to try to make men better people, and like we really do need to make men better people, to be honest with you, but there's always going to be bad people in the world, and we all really do need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves. The biggest takeaway from this, and I think the part that I found the most relatable, and I think this is the biggest red flag that I haven't seen as many people talk about, and it was overwhelming to me, I think because it was so relatable. One of the most dangerous men that you will ever get into a relationship with is actually a man who has no drive and ambition. He has not found his purpose in life. It's not necessarily that that man is automatically going to become abusive, although it is very likely, but you're never going to have a healthy relationship with a man that does not have, he doesn't have a purpose in life. He doesn't have an ambition. And by purpose in life, I don't mean something like shallow and superficial, like a man who's like, oh, my purpose is just playing video games, or my purpose in life is just to, you know, fool around, or it's not going to involve some kind of addiction or something like that. Like that's not a purpose in life. A man needs to have a purpose in life that is greater than himself, like a reason why he's here, like a reason for being here. I mean, that could be a very lofty thing, or it could be a very simple thing, but it has to be something that he is ambitious about and something that he takes pride in. And this isn't necessarily tied to how much money a man is making, although the reality is that obviously a man's purpose in life, it ideally would have enough money for him to be able to support, you know, a life and a family if he chooses to have one. So it's not necessarily tied to how much money he makes. There are men who make a lot of money and they don't really have a solid purpose and stuff. So I mean, the actual amount of money that a man makes isn't necessarily guaranteed as to whether or not he's gonna have a purpose. But a man who doesn't have a purpose in life, like he doesn't have an ambition, like some kind of thing that he knows that he's here to do, if a man hasn't found that, which unfortunately a lot of men today have not found that man will always try to destroy anything in your life that lights you up, because he's going to resent it, because he doesn't have that thing that lights him up, that purpose. For men, it's their purpose in life, it's their ambition, it's that thing that they feel like they're meant to be here to do. That's the thing that gives them their light. That's the thing that gives them their passion in life. And a man that has found that true passion, a man that has that ambition, is not going to be intimidated by a woman that has something that lights her up. So if a woman has a drive and a purpose and an ambition, he's not going to be threatened by that because he has that within himself. A man who doesn't have that is going to despise anything in a woman's life that lights her up. He may just resent her, and it may just lead to resentment, which will never become a healthy relationship. In extreme cases, he will try to destroy that. He will try to destroy anything that matters to you, and in really extreme cases, he may destroy you. And and it's heartbreaking, but that was really the biggest thing that I took away from the Gabby Petito documentary. Is there were so many instances of Gabby having this ambition. She wanted to have a social media account. She wanted to have a YouTube channel. She was, you know, learning how to use the editing, and she was learning how to use the, you know, the drones and the cameras, and like she was really ambitious about this van life. And it really did feel like Brian was just like literally along for the ride. But he didn't have the thing that like lit him up. Like he didn't have that like drive and ambition, that thing that he really wanted in life. So he was resenting her. Like he was resenting the things that lit her up because he didn't have that within himself. And eventually, I mean, that ended up in really, really dramatically bad circumstances. But men that have found their purpose in life, like the thing that they're ambitious about, they don't resent women for having something that lights them up because they have something that they're passionate about. Men that don't have that will always resent a woman for having something that lights her up. And oftentimes they'll have to do whatever they can to dim her light. In some cases, it becomes extreme. And I think that that's where it really got overwhelming for me watching this, because I know in my marriage with my ex-husband, I was working as a stand-up comic when we met. And I think when I met my ex-husband and we were talking about having a life together, having a family, I started to think, you know what, being out late at night in comedy clubs and stuff is probably not ideal if I am gonna, you know, settle down and start a family. But that's actually the reason I started Everyday Starlet. I started this kind of as like a beauty style channel and stuff, and that's actually the reason I started this, because I believed that kind of having this like social media brand and stuff was going to be something that I could have, that I could do from home, that would be an easy transition to maybe make a little bit of side money, because I was planning on starting a family and stuff like that. So it was something that I became very passionate about and was working on, and there was definitely a lot of resentment on my ex's part about, you know, how much doing this was lighting me up, how much I was getting excited about it, how much time and energy I was putting into this. I thought, well, he didn't really like when I was doing stand-up because that took up a lot of my time, and it was me being out late at night and things like that. It kind of felt like I got to a point where there was like nothing that I could do that would satisfy him. And it's not like that necessarily was my job, but I think I was still in very much people pleaser mode of like, I want to do something that isn't making him miserable. And I had to come to the realization that like he just didn't have that thing that was lighting him up. He didn't have that ambition. He didn't have that thing that he was like really passionate about. So he resented the things that I found passionate. He resented that stuff in me. I mean, I'm grateful that it just ended in divorce and didn't end in something more serious. It was definitely something that I felt like he would try to dim that light. He would try to destroy that light. It obviously never got as severe as some cases get, you know, and I never felt like threatened by him in any way, in a sense of like, you know, violence or anything. There was a lot of manipulation and things like that going on, but that's a whole other conversation. But it also is something that I've noticed in other relationships, that it was a pattern in my past of dating guys that didn't have any ambition and really tried to kind of destroy my passions and ambitions because they didn't have some of their own. I think it's also something that I've come to realize was a big pattern in childhood and stuff. So it's something that I know very deeply, and I can tell you that a man like that is just very dangerous. I think that that's a red flag that a lot of people are overlooking when they're talking about this documentary. Is there's no indication in this documentary at all that Brian had any ambition at all. I think there's been a little evidence that he worked like kind of like a landscaping job here and there and just did odd jobs and stuff, but it doesn't seem like he ever had any ambition. Even in this like van life situation, Gabby got the van, it was registered in her name. Kind of got the impression that maybe Brian contributed some money, but Gabby was the one that was working. She was working like more than full-time hours. She was working constantly at a job at Taco Bell to save money. Like this was obviously something that she was really trying to make happen. She was willing to put in the work, and it really does feel like Brian was just along for the ride. That dynamic is never going to work. It's never going to work out. If a woman has more drive and ambition and passion than the man is always going to resent the woman. And that's not to say that a woman can't have drive and passion and ambition, but if you are a woman who has a lot of drive and passion and ambition, you have to partner with a man that has more drive and passion and ambition than you do, or else he's going to resent it. You really have to pay attention to that. You really do, because a man that does not have drive and ambition, he doesn't have a passion and purpose in life, is going to resent you for anything that lights you up. Even if it's a small thing, he's going to resent it because he doesn't have that thing that lights him up. I just want women to know that, you know, as much as women have come, as far as women have come, as far as, you know, having careers and having ambitions and having passions and things like that in life, you cannot partner with a man that has less drive and ambition than you do. you just can't do it. It's not gonna work. He will end up resenting you for it. But in watching this documentary, it was just so clear that Brian really did not have a dream and a passion and ambition on his own. Now look, if you do find a guy that has a dream and a passion and ambition, could it conflict with your dream and passion and ambition? Yeah. It's situations like that where you have to make the decision of like, okay, if our dreams and our passion and our ambition aren't going to work together, we need to decide if staying together is really the right thing, or like, where can we compromise here where we're not going to build resentment? Because if compromising on your true drive and ambition is going to cause resentment, it's going to destroy the relationship anyway. So I realize sometimes it's easier to, like, especially if you are a woman that has a lot of drive and ambition and passions and stuff, sometimes it can be easier to find a guy that doesn't really have that, because you're like, well, he'll just go with the flow, and like his passions and ambitions aren't going to conflict with mine. They will eventually though, because the man's eventually going to resent you. He's going to resent you for having your passions and ambitions, and he's going to try to dim your light. In extreme cases, I mean, it can get extreme. I'll just put it that way. So that was a big message that I got from this, and I think probably because that was part of it that I really personalized on, watching the clips of Gabby like trying to figure out her, like, you know, her camera equipment and like some of the footage of her on the road, like kind of trying to set up her social media stuff, and seeing Brian kind of like so irritated by it, it brought me back, and it was so relatable, and I was not anticipating having that kind of a response to watching this documentary, because I didn't really anticipate it was going to feel that relatable. So that part just really hit me, and I don't see as many people talking about that, and I think that it really is something that we need to talk about, because it's a more subtle sign of potential abuse than, you know, actual violence. Like, I think actual violence can be a little bit easier to spot. I know sometimes when you're too close to it, or if it's something you're used to, like you're used to being in an abusive home, sometimes it's harder to spot some of these other dynamics, like a man not having a passion and ambition in life. I'm not saying he'll always become physically violent, but it's a very good sign that he will somehow become abusive, even if it's just verbally abusive, or even if it's just like he's just trying to dim your light because he can't handle you having a passion and ambition, because he resents it because he doesn't have one of his own. So it's a more subtle one that I want women to be aware of. And I understand when you're young, you know, maybe a guy just hasn't found his passion and ambition in life yet, and you know, it's understandable. Like, I don't think that, you know, it's something that you just automatically wake up one day and say, oh, here's my passion and there it goes. But men are not going to be able to fully commit to you. Some guys will date you, they'll propose to you, they may even marry you, but if they haven't found their true purpose in life, they're never really going to fully be committed to you. They have to find that purpose in life. So if you do meet a guy, he may not even be a bad guy, but he doesn't have that, like, that passion, that drive, that something in his life that he hasn't found that thing that he's meant to do in life, he's probably not ready to be a partner. I'm not saying you can't date him and stuff, but like, don't get into a committed relationship with him, and don't get into a situation with him that you can't easily get out of, because that man is not ready for a commitment. And I think as women, we really need to accept that about men. They need to find that passion and purpose on their own. That's something they need to do to work on. It's not something we can do for them. I know oftentimes as women, we think like we can love a man enough so that he'll find his purpose in life, or he'll become the man that we see him to be. Like, I think oftentimes we can see potential in men that they don't even see in themselves. And I understand that, because I've been there. They need to do that themselves. We can't do it for them. Another big thing that I took away from this documentary is the importance of intuition. And there's so many things in our society that disconnect us from our intuition, and there's so many instances in this documentary of people who had an intuition about this situation. There were several female law enforcement officers in the course of this story. You can definitely tell that the female law enforcement officers had a heightened sense of intuition. I think if you watch this, you can really tell. It's a really important reminder that we need to learn to trust our intuition. And I think that there's a lot of people, particularly women, who are taught to override our intuition. As women, our intuition is there to keep us safe. One of the reasons why our society is trying to disconnect women from our intuition, and I think honestly, if you were to ask most women that had something bad happen to them, if you were to ask most women like, hey, did you see that coming? Did you know that that was actually gonna happen? I bet if most women really were honest with themselves, they would say, yeah, I saw that coming and I didn't listen to my intuition. I'm not saying that's every instance, but that's very common in women. And we need to learn to trust our intuition. And too often we cut ourselves off from that. We convince ourselves like, oh no, we're just being crazy. Oh, we're just imagining things. Like, he's really not that bad. Or like, oh, he didn't really mean to hit me. Or like, oh, it was my fault, I provoked him, or something like that, when our intuition is never wrong. Our intuition knows more than our mind will ever know. Like, women have an innate women's intuition to keep us safe, to protect us. And we need to own that as women, because that's our best defense in staying safe in the world, is to really learn to trust our intuition. So that was a big theme. I also, you know, one of the things that really overwhelmed me, I talk about energetics and people talk about, you know, oh, energetics are just this imaginary thing and stuff. There, in the body cam footage of Gabby and Brian being pulled over in Utah, there was a really, really distinct example of energy shifts that stood out to me. I know there was a lot of debate about who was the aggressor and things like that. There was one instance that to me was like overwhelmingly evidence that clearly she was the one who was being abused, besides the fact that the original 911 call said that there was a man hitting a woman. So that's actual evidence. But in the actual body cam footage, if you notice, if you do watch the documentary, if you've seen the body cam footage, when Gabby is blaming herself, she talked constantly. She was, it's my OCD, and I do this, and when I do this, and when, you know, he locked me out of the van, and then I do this, and sometimes he can't handle me because I have this anxiety, and she was talking constantly. The minute that the cop asked her about a mark on her face and a mark on her arm, she got real quiet. Her entire energy completely shifted. She all of a sudden couldn't find words. That to me is, I mean, it's so overwhelming. Like, the minute I saw that. So when people say things like energetics aren't real, I don't know how you can watch something like that and not see that energetics are real. The shift that she went through from, like, when she was trying to blame herself, she was anxious, talking nonstop, to the minute that she gets asked a question where she might have to say something bad about him, she shuts down, she clams up, she goes into a freeze response, which I think is overwhelming evidence. And I realize that from a legal perspective, you know, I don't know how well that would hold up, you know, in the court of law or anything, but for me, that was overwhelming evidence that clearly she was the one being harmed. Because the fact that she, when she was blaming herself, she could just talk. And then the minute that the question shifted to where she was gonna have to possibly admit that he did something wrong, she went into freeze response. She just clammed up, she panicked. Yeah, that shift in energy, I think, was all I needed to see to know exactly what happened. And I think, again, I think that's where women's intuition and being an older woman, being a woman who's obviously old enough to be Gabby's mother, that was my initial reaction. Clearly they're just painting her as the aggressor because that's like, she's afraid of blaming him. And there could be a lot of layers to that. She might even be afraid that if she blamed him and he got arrested, that then she'd be by herself, which she ended up kind of being by herself. Cops tried to separate them. They got back together. It's not that uncommon. It's not that shocking, but she also was probably afraid of being, you know, out by herself, which, you know, again, probably an indication that these two kids should not have been on this trip. There's so many topics that we could cover in this, but the last one that I kind of want to touch on is, I don't love this term, but I really do think this is an appropriate term in this situation. It's the toxic boy mom phenomenon. I mean, essentially it's mothers who are coddling and enabling their sons. It does seem like there's an aspect to that that's going on in the Brian Laundrie situation with his mother. And it was only touched upon briefly in the documentary, so I don't want to make a whole lot of assumptions. I know there's a lot of people making a lot of assumptions about his parents' involvement and things like that, and they didn't really dive into that too deeply in the documentary, although they did touch on a really creepy letter that Brian's mom wrote to him and stuff, so that's very disturbing, and I'm not going to get into that. But there are a lot of signs that she was kind of a toxic boy mom, like a mother who was basically like enabling her son. One of the reasons I don't love that term in general is because a mother loving her son unconditionally is not wrong. Like, it's not weird. Enabling bad behavior is a problem. However, the tough love aspect is supposed to come from fathers. Fathers are the ones who are supposed to step in and teach boys how to become men. So I don't love the toxic boy mom attitude because, again, I feel like we are, again, blaming women for the failures of men. And if a woman is able to be a toxic boy mom, it means that the boy's father has not stepped in as that masculine role model to teach the boy to become a man and to not let the mother of the child coddle him. It's actually something I've talked about a lot. I have a film breakdown of the film 300, and they do touch on this. Obviously that's a movie, but there's this attitude that, like, when boys turn like about 7, that they're kind of like ripped from their mothers, and their mothers are basically like trying to hang on to their sons, but their sons have to kind of be taken away from the mother in order to live with men, in order to learn how to become men, how to become Spartan soldiers. That's an extreme case, obviously. However, there is something to that, and I'm not saying that like young boys should be like ripped from their mothers or anything like that. But it's not really a mother's role to toughen up a boy to become a man. Now, I'm not saying that a mother should be enabling bad behavior, and if you are, as a mother, the only parent, there's stuff that falls on you that really shouldn't fall on you, but that's unfortunately, you know, the situation you're in. But it's up to men in society to step up and to step in and teach boys how to become men. If you're a man who's sitting there like, well, his mother wouldn't let me teach him how to be a man, then maybe you need some lessons on how to be a man before you can teach your son how to be a man. And I don't know, one of the things that stood out to me was like, were Brian's parents enabling him? Yeah. There's a lot of focus on the mother being a toxic boy mom, and just in the brief little clips we got of Brian's father, he didn't seem like a pushover kind of guy. It always bugs me that we always put the blame on the mother, and I'm not saying that she's not, you know, probably at fault in this situation for sure, but we're not putting the blame on the father for not stepping up and teaching Brian how to become a man and, you know, kind of enabling him as well. And if his mother's enabling him, well, then the father's obviously allowing the mother to enable him. Again, I don't really love constantly putting the blame on women for the failures of men. I just don't love that in general. But the fact that Brian really didn't have any ambition, didn't have any direction, wasn't really any indications that he was really even working consistently or anything, kind of goes to show that the parents obviously were enabling him. I'm gonna say this, which I think might be controversial, but in the documentary, one of the things that stood out was that obviously after Gabby was tragically killed, Brian supposedly had, like they said, a 55-minute conversation with his parents and then proceeded to obviously, as they found out through investigations, have a plan, trying to cover his tracks, having alibis, texting her, getting back to her phone, and then using her phone to like text each other. Like, he really worked on a strategic alibi to make it seem like he wasn't the reason for her death. There's nothing in Brian's past history as far as his life or anything about him that would lead me to believe that he would be that smart and strategic. Not justifying this at all in any way, but a crime of passion, of anger, of frustration, wrong, absolutely. But he wouldn't be the first man that committed a crime as a crime of anger, of frustration. Like, he wouldn't be the first person to do that. Tragic, yes. Unacceptable, yes. But the fact that after that, he was so strategic in trying to cover his tracks and trying to get himself an alibi, there's nothing in his history. Like, if he has that level of like planning and strategy, he would have been successful in some area of his life. Like, he would have been able to find some kind of a job or career or something with that level of strategy. I mean, either he was holding back on his intelligence and his strategy and everything, all of a sudden got really calculated, or he was coached into how to cover his tracks. I don't know if it came from the parents. That's the only indication of like who he had contact with. So, I mean, that's a good assumption. Not typical that somebody would commit like a crime of passion, like a crime of emotion, like, you know, anger and frustration, and then actually commit a crime. Not acceptable, not justifying it at all, but he wouldn't be the first person that did that. But then to all of a sudden become so calculated, there had to have been some shift. And, you know, the fact that nothing in his past indicated that he had that level of like strategy and planning, like this whole trip and everything really did seem like this was all Gabby's doing, and Gabby had the plan, and Gabby was the one that kind of, you know, had the plan and the strategy, and she had the goals and she had the ambition, and now all of a sudden he's committed this crime and he's now the one with the strategy of figuring out how to cover things up. Like, all of a sudden he's got this master serial killer mentality here. I'm finding that hard to believe. You never know, maybe he was a lot smarter than I'm giving him credit for. And if it was that strategic, like, it would indicate maybe there was a lot more strategy to this, and it wasn't just sort of a crime of emotion or a crime of anger that went too far or something like that. Like, again, we don't really know. I know there's a lot of people have theories like that, you know, Gabby was talking to an ex-boyfriend. People think that he just got really angry and everything, but that, again, that would be a crime of emotion as opposed to a crime of like strategically, like, this is how I'm gonna take her out. But the fact that he was so calculated after it, again, there's no indication in any of his history or any of the information we have about him that he is that strategic. I mean, unless he was holding back or he had help planning how to cover his tracks. I think overall, and I know this is probably gonna be a controversial statement, but we spend so much time in our society treating girls like we should be treating boys, and treating boys like we should be treating little girls. We're so hard on women, pushing women to achieve and pushing women to do better and pushing women to, you know, like tough love and where's the women's accountability and all this kind of stuff. And then we wonder why women are so hard and hardened by life, because, you know, we're like push on women. We're so soft on men. We are so soft on men. And you know, starting from little boys, we're so soft on them, and like, you know, coddling them and you know, treating them like they're just, you know, babies. You know, again, for women, it's like, oh, she's 18, she's an adult, she should know better. But like with men, it's like, well, he's 50, he's still learning. You know, I mean, that's kind of the attitude we have in society now, and it's so twisted. It's so twisted, and I think that it's situations like this, and I'm not talking about like tough love and forms of abuse or anything like that, but like boys need male role models to learn to become men. And I'm sorry, and I know that there's a whole debate about like masculinity, and like obviously a man murdering a woman would be toxic masculinity. I mean, that's probably toxic masculinity at its most extreme. It doesn't mean that masculinity is toxic. It means that that is a toxic form of masculinity. A man hitting a woman, a man beating a woman, that is toxic masculinity, because what that is, it's toxic behavior in the false name of masculinity, because hitting a woman or harming a woman in some way does not make you masculine. It doesn't make you more of a man. Men will do that as a toxic behavior to give them a false sense of strength or a false sense of masculinity. A masculine man does not harm women. He protects women. And that's the problem that we have in our society right now, is we have so many boys who never learned to actually become masculine men. So their attitude is to either, in some cases, just lie down on the floor and let women walk all over them and play the victim, and or they end up becoming abusers, try to harm women to give themselves like a false sense of like being a man. And you don't have men that are actually stepping up into a healthy masculine energy of actually protecting women. That's interesting, because this is another side topic, is that there's a lot of people pointing out some warning signs of Brian's like controlling behavior, because it's text message conversations and tone and things can be interpreted. I'm not saying that he didn't exhibit controlling behavior, which again is a red flag, it's a warning sign. But there's a difference between a man's like controlling behavior, like if a man has a plan and wants to follow the plan and he's trying to create structure, some people can interpret that as controlling, but it's really more him having like a focused plan and wanting to follow a plan. And obviously if that becomes abusive, then that's a problem. But there's a difference between that behavior, which is not what Brian was exhibiting. He wasn't exhibiting that he had like a plan or structure or anything like that. There's a difference between that and a man who is just telling you what to do, or like, you can't go here, or I don't want you to do this, or I'm going to do something to keep you here. Like, he doesn't have a plan. He just wants to be able to control what you do and tell you what to do. That's different. And I feel like sometimes those things can get misinterpreted. You know, a man having a plan and wanting to follow through on the plan and sort of like taking the lead in that sense is very different from a man who's basically just, he doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have any idea of what's going on. He's not taking the lead. He just wants to tell you what to do. And he wants to just control who you're with, who you're seeing, what you're doing, what your schedule is, and just wants to control everything. And I know that there can be some gray area in that, but it does seem like, at least based on the text conversations, that Brian was very controlling in the sense of he wanted to control Gabby's life, which is another big warning sign, which is different than a man simply like having a plan and showing up and being like, okay, I made a plan, here's the plan. And obviously, if there's conflicts, or if the woman can't follow through on the plan for some reason, or if the plan makes her uncomfortable, obviously you don't want a guy who's so rigid in his plans that he can't actually listen to feedback, because that would be unhealthy as well. But there is a difference between a man sort of having a plan and taking the lead, and a man who just wants to constantly tell you what to do because he wants to be in control of everything that you're doing. They're different energetically. And I know that sometimes, particularly as young women, it can be hard to tell the difference, which is again why I always say that women need to take relationships slow and really pay attention to who a man is and like how that feels. Generally speaking, as a woman, a man who kind of like has a plan, is following through on the plan and taking the lead, if he's safe it's gonna feel calming in your nervous system. If a man is just trying to tell you what to do and control you, you'll tend to feel tightness in your nervous system. And oftentimes is when we're so used to having that tightness in our nervous system, a lot of times from like past trauma or just life in general, we can find that normal. I mean, that's one of the problems, and oh my god, I could go off on a whole other tangent about this, and I have a lot of videos about this, and so I'm not going to dive into this, but there's so much bad behavior in men that is so normalized in our society. And I make these videos and I talk about this stuff because I just want women, especially young girls, but honestly, you can never be too old to learn these lessons. I just want women to be able to spot these things because I want everybody to be safe. I want everybody to thrive. I mean, I don't make these videos because I want to harm men in any way, or you know, I want to see men thrive as well. I want to see men do better. I want to see men succeed. And I think that, you know, men not being coddled and men actually having, you know, healthy male leadership that will actually teach them how to be men and how to have a purpose in life and how to be leaders and things like that. I think that's incredibly healthy, and I want to see that happen more. I don't want to see men or women end up in the situation that both Gabby and Brian ended up in. You know, I especially make these videos because I want young girls to know what the warning signs are so that you don't end up, you know, my god, worst case scenario, in a situation like Gabby, and which is so tragic and it's so heartbreaking. If this message even reaches one young woman who gets the message and knows how to keep herself safe, then it's all worth it. I hate that this documentary even had to be a thing, or that this video even has to happen, but I really hope this message reaches women, and I really hope that some of the wisdom that I've learned in my life, that I am grateful I was able to survive, can help women so that they don't have to repeat the patterns, or God forbid that they don't have to end up in a situation that is so tragic. So I really appreciate you watching this video. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Any engagement, honestly, on this video helps boost it in the algorithm so that this message can reach more people. If you want to work on healing some of your trauma, connecting to your dark feminine energy, which is really great for like setting boundaries and really being able to stand in your solidarity, then please check out the Dark Feminine Energy Guided Journal. I also have the Recovering Pick Me Girl Guided Journal, which can really help you heal from a lot of behavior that can keep you very dependent on men, can keep you overlooking a lot of red flags, and can work on some of your trauma around that. Both of those journals are available on Amazon. Links are in the description box below, along with links to courses, masterclasses, and all my social media links. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.